something I hear residents say often is that they never thought they would live this long, or they never thought that they would run out of money. There are plenty of people who need to tap into the Medicaid system because they have run out of funds.
$1 million, $2 million may not be enough depending on the environment you desire to reside in. The flip may be you may not be able to stay in your home, and that could happen sooner than you think.
Hi and welcome. It's our latest episode of This Day and Age, where we continue to bring together experts in all things aging, providing vital information to help you and your loved ones make important decisions while navigating life's journey. This is your host, Phil Tower. I'm always pleased to be with you on each of these episodes of This Day and Age. And the baby boomer generation is continuing to age. There's nothing we can do about it. Along with that aging process comes great demand for senior living, and care needs increase as well. And the need for aging adults and their loved ones, that's you and I, to both understand and plan for their future and how they will be paying for their future care becomes even more important. So that's why in this episode, we brought in a couple of experts, as we do in all of these episodes. We're joined by, first of all, Holland Home CFO Adam Kinder, as well as Holland Home Financial Liaison Stephanie Hotz. Both Adam and Stephanie are here in this episode to walk us through some of the common misconceptions and assumptions surrounding paying for senior care, as well as the things you ought to be thinking about as you plan for your own future. This is the whole theme of every one of these episodes, is beginning to think about your future. First of all, Adam, welcome.
Thank you.
It's good to have you here. Yeah. Also, Stephanie Hotz, Financial Liaison with Holland Home. Thanks for being here as well. Let's talk about today what can be considered a pretty deep topic now more than ever, and this has been the theme of this season for This Day and Age. The concept of planning for and paying for care as you age has become increasingly important as the significant baby boomer population, and it is big, ages, and the healthcare needs increased. Adam, I'm going to turn to you first. Knowing all of this, and we've covered this before, what should listeners be considering as they begin to think about their future care and how they plan to pay for it? And I want you to answer that question. But let's first of all talk about an obvious thing is, are people even seriously saving enough for the future?
That's a great question. I think it's the $1 million question, so to speak. The short answer to that is likely not. I think statistics, while I don't have them at my fingertips, would suggest that the vast majority of folks have undersaved for their potential future care needs. And so a lot of that is a function of both not just undersaving, but also kind of underestimating what the cost of that care is ultimately going to be. So a lot of our discussion really also is baked in, what does the care environment look like, and what's it going to look like as people start to seek out care, and what's driving that cost. Historically over the last 20 years, the cost of healthcare or medical CPI has more than doubled. Most people don't realize that. But that ultimately drives even more of the saving shortfall than the reality that people are just generally not saving. So there's a whole lot of considerations at play. But the short answer to your question is no. People really aren't saving enough given their likely care realities in the future.
And not only that, they don't start planning soon enough, right?
That's exactly right. I mean, most people, you're told usually when you get a job, or hopefully you're told, hey, start saving for retirement. And that's a very real and serious statement. And it's really not just because you want to go on trips and experience all the vibrancy of life, post your working career, but it's also the reality that you're going to consume a lot of resources in the later third of your life. And the largest thing that you're going to likely consume is healthcare. Mm-hmm. And so what does that look like? So yeah.
Stephanie, as we talk about this issue of paying for care, especially for care in your senior years, what this really comes down to is a bit of math, basic math, knowing the numbers, but also thoughtful planning. Can you talk about those two processes?
So something I hear residents say often is that they never thought they would live this long, or they never thought that they would run out of money. There are plenty of people who need to tap into the Medicaid system because they have run out of funds, or they have to tap into the benevolent program that is at our facility or other facilities throughout a continuum.
Are you talking about the continuing care agreement here at Holland Home?
Yes. So the continuing care agreement at Holland Home, the residents who have run out of funds, they're available to use those funds in the benevolent care fund that we have.
It's a safety net is what it comes down to. And it's one of those very rare things that you find in a facility like Holland Home, in a place like Holland Home.
Right.
Well, and I think it's fair to say one of the realities that people don't realize is like the true cost, right? When you think about a per day basis of assisted living or skilled nursing, that's one of those numbers that nobody really pays attention to until it's in front of them, right? And the reality being that the average cost for a year in assisted living, well, it's going to vary based on your care needs. Is going to be in that $60,000 to $80,000 a year, and that's none of that is covered by Medicare or Medicaid usually.
None.
And then you have skilled nursing on top of that, and that's $10,000+ a month.
Not to mention prescriptions
Exactly.
and everything else that goes with aging, right?
So you have all of those forces at play, and Stephanie would be able to confirm this. Most people are a bit shell shocked at that reality, but most people are going to experience that regardless of facility that they're looking into.
Mm-hmm.
And for most people, if they're long-term care, meaning they haven't moved from hospital stay into skilled nursing for what's called short-term rehab, Medicare is not picking up any of the tab. They're only going to pick up the tab if it's under a Part A Medicare stay. And so that's where people think that Medicare covers skilled nursing, but it only does to a very limited basis. And same thing on Medicaid. Medicaid requires you to meet the income and asset limitations, which those are things that Stephanie works with on a regular basis.
And is it fair to say, and I'll ask this of both of you, I think a lot of people make an incorrect assumption that there will be somebody to take care of them in their own home, and then they realize they need a place like Holland Home. And they have failed to think this through, because that's, again, where we talk about math and thoughtful planning, thinking about both scenarios. And Stephanie is financial liaison here at Holland Home. I'm assuming you have a lot of people who get surprised by that as well, too, thinking, maybe they didn't think about both of those angles, home care versus living in a place like Holland Home. Fair enough?
Yeah. For home care, the cost is, I would say, close to double what nursing would be.
Yeah, it can be significant to stay to attempt to stay in your home long term.
Even nursing is about $120,000 a year, and the average person's in nursing about a year. So if you're looking at the cost for your future care, the average person's in assisted living for about 3 years, and then skilled nursing on top of that for about a year. You're looking at well over $330,000. So tapping into those resources, when you run out of money, you have to make sure that you have done what you need to do ahead of time to make sure that you get the benefits that are available. Spending down appropriately, getting the kind of care you need isn't cheap, but there are resources available.
And as people reach out to you as financial liaison, they have all kinds of questions. Do you have common questions that you get asked a lot?
Usually it's, can I give any money away, or what is included with this? Any medical coverage is covered by Medicaid, but anything outside of that, no. Your medical is covered, but you have a home or a car, anything outside of that isn't. So a lot of questions come around divestment or things you've done in the past that can come back to get you later.
And there's really not any specific amount that any planner can say to a person, well, $1 million is enough, $2 million is enough. Because I think some people, again, have that misconception that, okay, I've got $1 million and that will last me for, maybe the 5 or 10 years that I'm going to be in a facility. again, bad assumptions. Adam, fair enough to say?
Yeah, I mean, you could say it'd be enough if you planned accordingly, right? So again, it comes back to is you're thinking about the care you desire as you age, which can be hard for some of us who are able-bodied and not quite in that stage of life. But as you're thinking about, okay, what are my desires, right? I want to stay in my home for as long as possible. So what does that look like, right? That's going to involve perhaps modifications to your home. So you can stay in your home, and that's going to obviously cost money. You're still going to have to pay for the upkeep of your home and maintaining that. Eventually your body will fail you, and you won't be able to mow your lawn or take care of your driveway or do basic things around your home anymore, and you have to pay more and more folks to take care of you, and that might involve home care, which, that is predominantly private pay, unless it's certified home health, which means you had a qualifying stay in a hospital. And so you're paying for what's called private duty or kind of in-home care aides, and that's going to cost you anywhere from $25 to $40 an hour. Well, how many hours of that care might you need, and as it continues to climb? And so, $1 million, $2 million may not be enough, depending on the environment you desire to reside in. The flip may be you may not be able to stay in your home, and that could happen sooner than you think. And then what does that look like? And if it's you and a spouse, now you could be looking at all those numbers times two. And so really being cognizant of, okay, let's think through all the different scenarios that could play out. What's our desired scenario? And then what's our plan B, C, and D? And how do we try and, mitigate financial risk on each of those? And so it's where really you can't plan enough when it comes to these things.
And the X factor here is the number of available caregivers. We've talked about this in previous episodes. It's a real question mark. As we have this conversation in 2023, things are tight. It's a challenge. Who knows what it's going to look like in 2028 or 2033?
Absolutely. I mean, I think you could point to prior episodes of this podcast where we talked about it kind of ad nauseum, and I don't think we can emphasize it enough, but even today's caregiver shortage is going to become exponentially more challenging over the next 20 years or so as the projections play out. And like I said, we've already started to feel the impacts of that. And so while you may even plan to stay in your home and use home care, you may not be able to find anybody. And that may actually force you into considering a facility to receive, assistance in. And so even though, it may be a well-oiled, well-vetted plan, the caregivers just may not be there. And you may find yourself looking at assisted living just simply out of a necessity to at least get the care that you need, despite it not being the environment that you originally desired. And that's going to be a very real reality for a large swath of the baby boomers as they move through.
Yeah, and the other thing we've talked about previously is that we're living longer. We have 75-year-olds that are running 5Ks and 85-year-olds that are living very active lives, and even some 90 to 95-year-olds who are the youngsters, depending on their neighbors. Being aware of the fact, Stephanie, you've got a plan for 30-plus years of health care coverage after retirement. That's what you alluded to in the beginning. People said, I never thought I was going to live this long. How do you counsel them on that?
That's hard, just because nobody can predict the future. And a lot of people think that Medicare, I have Medicare, it's going to cover everything. But what they don't realize is Medicare is your major medical, and that covers hospitalizations, that covers some skilled nursing rehabilitation. The average person is about 2 weeks for rehab, and then after that, you have to figure out what to do. If you're going to go home and need extra care, how are you going to pay for that? Or if you have to stay in nursing, how are you going to pay for that? There's a lot that you have to do to talk, with your family, figure out what the best plan is to prepare for things. But, it's hard to do because obviously nobody knows, and then the cost of everything just keeps going up. Yeah. So how do you plan for that?
Start early.
It's hard.
Yeah, start really early.
Yes.
And I can't say this enough. Don't make assumptions that you know how these things work. A lot of people know what Medicare is, but they have really no idea about the limitations. And I think you hear that from a lot of people, whether they're 45 or 65 or even 75. Adam Kinner, you're shaking your head.
Yeah.
They're still learning this at 75.
Oh yeah, I mean, Stephanie knows far more than I do about all the nuances here. But there is so much variability, so much fluidity to health plan coverages, the care environment for post-acute care. I mean, all of that is just this constantly morphing animal, and it's a really challenging environment for most people to try and navigate, because they're consuming care and they're also trying to navigate care and the cost of the care at the same time, unlike most other seasons of their life where maybe they haven't experienced the healthcare system in utilizing their health benefits and what that looks like previously. At least most of us hope that we haven't had to utilize them a whole lot. So it's the newness of all of it for everybody can be very intimidating. And that's where, having somebody like a Stephanie who can be present for people as they have questions becomes a huge asset. So that's, if there's one takeaway, it's really trying to identify people who you can lean on to ask questions of, to try and understand what the care environment may look like for you, and then have them help guide you through that care navigation, and help kind of advise you along the way as to how you can achieve the outcomes you desire.
As far as we know, Stephanie is not available for private consultations in your own home. That would maybe be something later on. We're going to take a break right here and continue our conversation on paying for care as you age. You're listening to This Day and Age. We want to thank the experts who make this podcast and all of our episodes possible. The experts on all things aging, from Holland Home, Faith Hospice, and Atria Home Care. They're bringing this episode to you today and all of our previous episodes. And as you know by now from listening to these episodes, and we hope you've listened to as many as possible, this important information is going to save you a lot of time. It's going to save you money, seriously, and a lot of added frustration when planning for your future or for your aging parents' future. See, here's the thing. You've got to think about it as that adult child thinking about your parents, but in the same thought, you've got to be thinking about your own care, whether that's 20 years from now or 30 years from now. And we've already told you, it's not too soon to be thinking about how you and your wife or you yourself are going to do it. You need to begin thinking about that. If you'd like to learn more, listen, we have these experts for you right here at Holland Home, Faith Hospice, and Atria Home Care. If you do want to arm yourself with their valuable information and learn how they are supporting growing populations here across West Michigan and beyond, all you have to do is visit thisdayandage.org. Again, the website, it's a great website with links to everything you need, thisdayandage.org. We're speaking with, by the way, in this episode, Holland Home CFO Adam Kinder, also financial liaison with Holland Home. She is Stephanie Hotz, as we continue to talk about paying for care as you age, the Medicare questions, the private insurance questions, Medicaid, a lot of misconceptions in there. So, Stephanie, we had talked about coverage by Medicare and also private insurance coverage earlier. I think it's safe to say there are a ton, as we've already identified, assumptions and misconceptions about Medicare and private insurance. Adam, I want to turn to you. Can you help listeners understand where the private insurance ends, and maybe some people are already on Medicare, so they didn't even have that piece. Can you walk us through that?
Yeah, so I mean, some of it is a little bit what we touched on, but so for those who are age 65 and older, they likely qualify for Medicare coverage, which makes them also likely eligible for a form of kind of supplemental coverage, or they could pursue a kind of a Medicare Advantage plan as an alternative to their Medicare coverage. And some of the limitations with that, as Stephanie alluded to, it really generally just covers major medical, right? Only recently have we seen some Medicare Advantage plans dabble in some kind of non-major medical coverages, like allowing for some elements of in-home care assistance that isn't previously kind of prescribed, so to speak, and some kind of fitness level benefits. And so really the coverage from a healthcare standpoint ends right there. So to the extent that you actually need assistance with what we call activities of daily living, you're not going to find, generally speaking, your Medicare or Medicare Advantage plan extending to help cover those, at least at this stage. The hope is that, as people age, that those plans may find themselves willing to cover more of those forms of assistance needed just to keep people out of emergency departments and in higher cost of care settings. But generally, it ends the moment you need something other than medical care. And so that's where a program like Medicaid can kick in, specifically for those who qualify, and it's a limited subset who ultimately qualifies, right? It's income and asset qualified, and you have to have, assets, at least in the state of Michigan. It varies based on state. In the state of Michigan, where we're located, it's $2,000 in annual income, $2,000 in annual in an asset balance, and then your income level has to be below your cost of care. So even then, there's kind of this missing middle, right? So there's this whole long-term care piece, and that all becomes private pay at that point. And so some people have purchased long-term care insurance, and if you were to ask about that, typically, if you're waiting to purchase long-term care insurance until you're in your 60s or 70s, it's too late. The cost is going to be too high, and so a lot of people, we would encourage them to look to buy into long-term care insurance in their 40s or 50s. And even then, it's unlikely you're going to find yourself receiving a benefit that's going to cover your full cost of care. And so there's a whole litany of things for people to think about when it comes to what happens when purchased healthcare coverage doesn't cover this anymore.
You said one thing that I want to go back to, and I hope our listeners of this episode will remember this. Think about, how do you want to live? Because, a lot of people who say they're just stubbornly independent, at some point, you can't be stubbornly independent. So you're going to need to have that additional aid. You may need to have multiple pieces of additional care. And it's really important you think about that. And also think about the assets. Okay, you run out of money. Stephanie, you had mentioned this earlier. It almost becomes a point of, I need to give stuff away so I can qualify or sell things, and thinking about understanding those numbers. Is that a big part of your role as financial liaison?
Yeah, so I help the families maneuver through applying for Medicaid and all the hurdles that come with it. A lot of it.
Notice the key word was families.
Yes,
that's an important thing. I don't want the family members listening to this thinking they're off the hook. This is just Stephanie and your parents. No, you've got to be a part of this conversation because it's going to impact you down the line as well. So go ahead, finish that thought.
A lot of them, they want to qualify for Medicaid because they know it's going to help cover their nursing room and board. But they ask, well, can I give money to my son, or can I give money to my daughter? You can't give any money away. You can't give your car away. Can't give your house away. There's a lot of things that Medicaid puts in place so that, the people who really need the benefit gets the benefit. So I help families go through those, making sure that there's no divestments down the road that could cause an issue with Medicaid getting approved.
Is there any advice you can give to someone, an adult, child listening to this right now who is about to enter into this period, things that you would tell them to begin thinking about now?
I would say planning and talking to your loved ones in figuring out what their assets are, what they, like Adam said earlier, what you want to have done, because by the time you're in a crisis, your options are going to be very limited. So it's better to think in advance and to do as much in advance. If somebody were to have something happen and they go into a coma, their kids are rushing to try to figure out, where's mom's bank account? I have no idea. Things like that just make it so much harder, where you're already dealing with a crisis of your loved one having a health decline. On top of that, you have to try to figure out how you're going to pay for care.
And we could do an entire episode, both Stephanie and Adam, on transparency with the parents who don't want to talk about money with their kids. You're looking at me going, I'm totally aware of this problem. This is a huge problem, because it's that secret vault that stays in the mind, and then they're incapacitated and it becomes a problem. As Stephanie said, how do we access mom's bank account? Where did dad keep these funds it becomes a huge mystery that's incredibly frustrating. That's why we have said over and over again in this episode, have these conversations earlier.
Mm-hmm. Oh, absolutely. I mean, it's just, ironically, this is a conversation you start to try and have with your own parents at some point in time too, and it's you hit the nail on the head. It's this vault of information that parents often keep to themselves that they never allow their children to have access to. But the reality is that at some point in time, the script is going to flip, and the parents are going to need the kids ultimately to help take care of them to some extent. And so there has to come a point in time where the kids and the parents kind of look at each other and say, I think this is the moment where we need to have some real transparent conversations. You have some real critical key family moments and say, okay, let's talk through this. As much as this is really uncomfortable, meaning the parents are letting the kids into kind of an area of their private lives that they've historically kept them separated from, but then also talking about, how do I want to receive care in the future? And then beyond that, also letting the kids know, like, hey, maybe I haven't saved enough. And that can be a really hard moment for parents and kids to have, but you got to have that moment rather than all of a sudden the kids are moving into a situation which they go, oh my word, and you don't have any resources either. How are we going to make this happen? And all of a sudden now you've transferred the liability or the burden from those who need care to those who are ultimately trying to coordinate that care. And so really having those conversations in advance, letting the kids in, is really, really critical to planning for future payment on your care needs.
Yeah. And as we talked about in a previous episode, it is trending now that the next generation is having fewer kids, fewer people to take care of you. Something you really need to think about. In fact, a lot of people living lives as single adults with very little family or relatives in the area, which it compounds this challenge even more. So I want to wrap up this episode by really kind of giving our listeners some key takeaways. If there's one thing I heard Stephanie say over and over again, don't make assumptions, have conversations early. What else would you add to that list that you hear from people now saying, woulda, shoulda, coulda, wish I would have done that? What would you recommend?
Having plans in place, deciding early on what you want, and then making sure that your loved ones know. Having power of attorney for financial, not just medical, is very important also. Sharing your information with whoever is going to be responsible for your affairs instead of just assuming that they're going to figure it out when you can't tell them. Very important.
One of the things we haven't even touched on is you got to begin thinking about where you want to live if you want to be. We use the term CCRC, which stands for Continuing Care Retirement Communities. That's what you're all about at Holland Home. But you've got to begin to do that research early because demand is really high, even right now in 2023. Right, Adam?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it's everything that we've been talking about as the baby boomers are starting to move through the demand on our facilities and facilities like ours and just nationwide. We're only at the tip of the iceberg at this point. There's so much underneath this thing that the big question is, are we really actually prepared for this? And so, people are going to find it harder and harder and harder to find places at a place like Holland Home or communities like ours simply because we don't have the unit level availability or the facility capacity that the baby boomer generation is ultimately going to require. And so they really have to think about how are we going to get the care we need.
Yeah,
absolutely.
And have those conversations. Stephanie, you talked about this. Have those conversations with your family. Have those frank conversations. Because I hate to mention reality, but there are some adult kids who just say, Mom and Dad, I don't know if I can take care of you. It's hard. Or it's something they just don't want to do. Or sometimes they're selfish, and you need to face those realities and then begin to plan for yourself.
Absolutely.
It's a hard reality, but it's true, right?
Absolutely.
Any final thoughts, Adam, as we wrap up this episode?
I mean, the thing I would add is that, without planning, ultimately it's going to cost you or your loved ones in one way, shape, or form, right? Either they're going to have to figure out a way to adjust their lives to help accommodate your care needs as you may age, which may mean it could have a multi-generational effect, right? So they won't be able to save as much because they might have to leave the workforce early to help take care of you, and that could trickle down as you go. And so out of kind of not just for your own future care needs and desires, but also a reflection of, how might I be aiding my kids and setting them up for their own future care needs and desires. That all has to be a part of the equation. And so you really can't talk about it enough. And then the one final thing I would really note is the overall cost of care, and just thinking about the key driver in the cost of care when it comes to post-acute care is the cost of labor. And labor will continue to go up. Demand on nursing care is going to continue to increase, and that's going to result in continued upward wage pressure. There's a nationwide nursing shortage that's only likely going to continue to get worse. All those things work in the wrong direction as far as the future cost of care goes, and that's only going to expand the gap between current savings rates and future cost of care needs. And so that has to be something that people are thinking about and talking about right now, because it's going to place a significant burden on them when they do need that care in another 10, 15, 20, 30 years. It's going to cost significantly more than it even does today.
Yeah, I will call those cautionary words. Some people may describe them as more, but I'm glad you said them. Adam Kinder is the CFO here at Holland Home. Also want to thank Stephanie Hotz, financial liaison at Holland Home. She's the one answering a lot of those tough questions from the residents here in the communities at Holland Home, and hopefully answering a lot of your questions as well. As we wrap up this episode, we hope you are feeling more equipped to take those steps, as we've talked about, to have those conversations and start today. Start planning for your future care. You'll thank your future self down the road. Be sure to subscribe as well so you don't miss an episode of This Day and Age. And if you would, share this episode with family and friends and make sure they're informed as well to make confident decisions as they age. And as always, I want to thank you for joining us for this episode of This Day and Age. I'm Phil Tower. Thank you for listening.